Hola, bienvenidos nuevamente a todos a mi canal, Spanish Blueprints. My name is Joshua, and this channel is dedicated to guiding you during your Spanish learning journey. And did you know that you can learn Spanish basically anywhere just by using podcasts? In this video, I'm going to be giving you my top 5 best Spanish podcasts for beginners. Podcasts are one of the best Spanish learning resources that you have available to you. They are extremely convenient and you can take them just about anywhere you go if you have a computer or if you have a cell phone. You can listen to podcasts on your commute to work, if you're going by train, if you're in a car, or if you're walking. Then you can also listen to podcasts when you're in your house. If you are cleaning, if you're washing clothes, washing dishes, if you're taking a shower. You can also listen to podcasts when you're working out. So if you're going on a walk, if you're going on a run, if you're just warming up on the bike in the gym, you can listen to them anywhere. Podcasts are also a very good resource so you can start listening to native Spanish speaking content so you can close that textbook and put the grammar book aside for a little bit. If you're an audiobook or storytelling lover, then you're going to really enjoy this first podcast that I have for you. It is called the Story Learning Spanish Podcast, and it was created by Ali Richards, and the host is an Argentine writer named Sofia. Now, technically, this podcast was not created for absolute beginners, but my desire for you is that you don't reject a Spanish learning resource just because you don't think that you have reached a particular proficiency level. Because you can still learn a lot regardless, even if you can't comprehend every single thing that might be in a podcast or a TV show. And this is going to open you up to more opportunities to learn, because the reason why I have this podcast selected is because storytelling is a very important skill for a Spanish learner and in communication in general. When you're listening to this podcast, you need to understand that you're not just listening to words, but you're also going to be listening to the native Spanish speaker, how they're pronouncing their words, their pacing, the pitch of their voice. Because all that is very important when it comes to speech, and it's going to be able to give you indicators of how that person is feeling and what they're thinking by how they express the words that they speak. So my advice to you would be to focus on the actual sounds and the pronunciations of the words, and not just off what you don't know. As a Spanish learner, you can't just say words like hola, ¿cómo estás? You're going to be saying it with more energy, and you're going to have a different pitch. You're going to sound different because you're going to say it more like hola, ¿cómo estás? So you'll be able to hear different words and phrases in context and from actual expressions from native Spanish speakers. So the big focus of this podcast for the creator is that you're going to get a lot of exposure to the Spanish language through storytelling, because he believes that it is one of the most natural ways of learning the language and not just reading outside of a book. So you're going to be able to learn the vocab words a lot faster and be able to learn the language in context. So one awesome thing about this podcast is that they release a new episode or a story every single day. So you're not going to lack content at all. So within each episode, there is a story that is told in Spanish, and then in the middle of the episode, you're going to have like a little review session of the words and the phrases that were just used in the first part of the episode. And then after that, it's going to repeat the same story. Also, if you're using Spotify, you'll be able to see the transcript of the story within the description of the podcast. The second podcast is called Learn Spanish con Salsa. And the purpose of this podcast is that you immerse yourself in Latino culture through music. And this is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to because I love Spanish music, and it has been an amazing way to learn more about the culture of different countries. You can get a variety of different topics for each episode. Like one episode is called What I'd Do Exactly If I Was Learning Spanish from Scratch. And then within this topic, there's another episode called 5 Quick Tips to Boost Your Spanish Study Routine. In other episodes, you're going to hear the learning strategies of the guests that appear on the podcast. Like one episode is called How to Lose Your Fear in Spanish. And this conversation was happening between the host and a translator. And then she also has interviews with a variety of Black expats who have lived in Latin American countries. You're able to hear their experience living in a different country and also learning the language and learning the culture. And then, of course, you're going to get a whole bunch of episodes that are focused directly on specific songs and Latin American music as a whole. One fun way that the host teaches you grammar is through analysis of a particular song and its lyrics. For example, she uses the lyrics from the song Periódico de Ayer to explain the differences between the phrases para qué and por qué. You're also going to be exposed to a lot of different Spanish accents from the different songs that she's analyzing. So you'll be able to learn a lot of colloquial phrases and words from Cuba, Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. So if you want to learn a lot of methods to learning Spanish using music and you're a travel lover and you love to hear the experiences of other Spanish learners as well, then this podcast is for you. Now, the next podcast is called Doorway to Mexico. So this podcast really caught my attention because there is a Spanish teacher. Her name is Paulina. She's from Mexico, and she's actually having conversations with her student. But not only that, the student has a family. Then you're going to be hearing different conversations that this family is having amongst themselves and then also with native Spanish speakers. So it's extremely interesting because it's like you're actually there and you're hearing everything that's going on. You can hear people in the background, you can hear music, you can hear cars and things like that. So a big goal of this podcast is that it takes you from book smart to street smart. And then secondly, the creator wants you to get comfortable using advanced vocabulary in Spanish. Paulina, the Spanish teacher, and her student, they have a conversation, like a review session about the conversation that the student had throughout the podcast. So he'll ask questions about the different colloquial phrases that were used by the native Spanish speaker, and then also getting more clarity on how to pronounce things correctly. In the first season of this podcast, you're going to be listening to a lot of episodes about conversational Mexican Spanish with a focus on travel. So you're going to be hearing a lot of dialogue between the student and native Spanish speakers about restaurants, shopping, bars, and beaches. One of my favorite episodes within this season is when the student was at the airport. For me, traveling vocabulary can be quite difficult. For me, it was very valuable to hear that interaction that the student and the family was having with the driver that took them from the airport to the hotel. Also, other episodes where the family was at a street market when they were doing their hotel check-in and also when they were asking directions. It's a very fun and entertaining way to be able to understand more about the Mexican culture through these different conversations that an actual Spanish learner like you is having with native Spanish speakers. Now, the fourth podcast is called Coffee Break Spanish. So this podcast is kind of similar to Doorway to Mexico in the sense that you're going to be listening to a lot of conversations with the Spanish teacher, whose name is Mark, with his Spanish student. But in this case, in each episode, which are about 15 to 20 minutes long, but this one is different because you're actually going to be listening to a lesson that the teacher is giving the student throughout the whole episode. And one of the most interesting thing about this podcast to me is that the Spanish teacher is a non-native speaker. So he is from Scotland. So it's as when he is talking with his student, they're speaking in English, but he has a Scottish accent. But when you start hearing them speak Spanish, you're able to see how different those two accents are. During this time frame, the teacher does a very good job in explaining the different grammar rules associated with Spanish, and then also being able to explain how to pronounce different words and phrases to the student. From time to time, you'll be hearing the teacher correct the student when she pronounces things incorrectly. And I think this is very helpful, especially as someone who is an English speaker, because you'll be able to hear how they are incorrectly pronouncing something. Because if they're doing that, then there could be a high chance that you're making that same mistake. So it's really interesting to hear another English speaker going through this phase of learning Spanish because that's what you're doing as well. So a few topics from the first season are greetings, introducing yourself, talking about your family, your job, and your likes and dislikes. Also within each episode, you're going to be hearing a little review session between the teacher and the student. For example, if the topic for one episode is greetings in Spanish, then that teacher is going to have a little conversation about everything that he just taught to that student. So they're going to be going through hola, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo te llamas? And things like that. And with each season, it's going to get a little bit more difficult. So some of the topics in the second season are talking about your routine throughout the day, and then also getting more into talking about the past, and then also how to describe things using adjectives. Now, the last podcast that I have for you is called Un Día en Español, and this podcast comes from the language learning app Babbel. It's more of a story-based podcast where you'll be brought into the life of a native Spanish speaker in Latin America or in the United States. So you'll be able to hear a native Spanish speaker talking about a past experience, also in the present as well. And one big reason why I like this podcast a lot is for the style of narration. So you can expect to listen to episodes like when Andrea learned how to surf for the first time, even though she didn't know how to swim, or the day that Melina met her sister for the first time. And another is Carmela's first day teaching Spanish at a Pennsylvania college. Also with each episode, you're going to be able to see the transcript in the description of that episode. Thank you all for watching this video today. If you found value in it, please give it a thumbs up. Share with your language learning friends, and also let me know in the comment section below if you have ever heard any of these podcasts before. Hasta la próxima.